There are moments in life that change everything. Not slowly, not gradually, but in one single second, on one ordinary night, when you least expect it. This is a story about a man who loved his family more than anything in this world. A man who worked hard every single day, who never complained, who always found a way to smile even when things were difficult. His name was Raza, and the one mistake he made was not out of carelessness or laziness. It came from something much more human, from trust, from a quiet, unshakable belief that what had always worked before would always work again. That belief cost him everything. Raza was not a wealthy man, but he was a proud one. He lived in a modest house on a narrow street in a small town where everyone knew each other. He had a wife named Sana, a woman with a warm smile and patient eyes who had stood by him through every difficult year. They had 2 children together, a 7-year-old boy named Bilal and a 5-year-old girl named Hira. Bilal was the kind of child who asked 100 questions a day and never got tired of learning. Hira was quieter, softer, the kind of little girl who would hold your hand without being asked and rest her head on your shoulder like she belonged there. Together, they were Raza's whole world. Everything he did, every early morning and every late night, was for them. Raza worked as a delivery driver for a local goods supplier. He drove long routes every day, sometimes starting before sunrise and returning well after dark. The job did not pay much, but it was steady, and steady was enough. He was the kind of man who took pride in showing up, in being reliable, in never missing a shift, never making excuses, never letting his family go without. His co-workers respected him, his neighbors admired him, and his children worshipped him the way young children worship their fathers, completely, without question, with eyes full of wonder. To do all of this, Raza depended on one thing above everything else: his car. It was an old white sedan nearly 15 years old, with chipped paint on the hood and a side mirror held in place by a strip of electrical tape. The interior smelled like old leather and engine oil. The dashboard had a crack running across it from one end to the other. The air conditioning had stopped working 2 summers ago, and the radio only picked up 1 or 2 stations clearly. But to Raza, that car was not a machine. It was a partner. It was the thing that had carried him through every long shift, every difficult season, every challenge this life had thrown at him. He trusted it the way you trust something that has never failed you. But things were starting to fail. Slowly, quietly, in ways that Raza kept choosing not to see. There was a small oil stain that appeared on the ground wherever the car was parked for more than a few minutes. The brakes had started making a soft grinding sound when pressed too hard, a sound that mechanics would recognize immediately as a serious warning. The headlights had grown dim over the past year, the kind of dim that makes a night road look closer and more blurred than it really is. And there was a new vibration in the steering wheel, a faint trembling that appeared whenever the car crossed 60 kilometers per hour. These were not small things. They were signs. But Raza had learned to live with them. His younger brother Cameron had noticed all of it. Cameron was a mechanic by trade and knew cars the way a doctor knows the human body, by feel, by sound, by instinct. He had walked around Raza's car more than once, crouching down to look under the chassis, pressing the brake pedal slowly, listening to the engine idle. Each time, he came back with the same expression: serious, concerned, a little frustrated. He told Raza more than once that the brake pads were dangerously worn, that the oil leak needed to be fixed before it became an engine problem, that driving this car at night on a highway was a risk that was simply not worth taking. Raza always listened, and then he always smiled and said the same thing: "Cameron, this car has never let me down. It will be fine." Their neighbor Uncle Farouk had said something similar one evening, watching Raza wipe down the windshield in the driveway. Uncle Farouk was an older man who had seen enough of life to speak plainly. He leaned against the gate and told Raza that old machines do not give warnings forever, that one day they simply stop. Raza laughed and told him he was being dramatic. But Uncle Farouk did not laugh. He just looked at the car for a long moment, then looked at Raza and said quietly, "Just get it checked, son. Do it for Sana and the children." Raza nodded. He meant it in that moment. But the days passed, the shifts kept coming, and the trip to the mechanic never happened. Sana knew too. She had noticed the oil stain on the driveway and asked about it. Raza told her it was nothing serious. She had felt the shaking in the steering wheel once when she sat in the passenger seat and asked him about that as well. He told her he would get it looked at soon. She trusted him enough to let it go, because Raza was not a reckless man. He was careful and responsible in every other area of their life. She believed that if he said it was fine, maybe it truly was fine. Or maybe she simply did not want to think about the alternative. Most of us are like that. We see something that worries us, and we choose to believe the comfortable version of the story instead of the honest one. It was a Friday evening in late October when everything changed. Raza's cousin was getting married in a town about 90 kilometers away, and the whole family had been looking forward to it for weeks. Bilal had been asking about the wedding for days. He wanted to see the lights, the food, the music, the dancing. Hira had been practicing how to hold her little clutch purse the way she had seen her mother do it. Sanaa had bought a new outfit and spent the morning getting ready with the kind of careful attention that tells you a woman is genuinely happy about something. And Raza had pressed his clothes the night before and polished his shoes until they shone. It was a joyful day, the kind of day that reminds you why life is beautiful. The wedding was everything they had hoped for. The venue was bright with colored lights strung from every pillar and archway. There was music and laughter and long tables filled with food. Bilal ran around with the other children, flushed and wild with excitement. Hira sat close to her mother most of the evening, watching everything with her quiet, curious eyes. Raza sat with his relatives and felt the kind of deep contentment that only comes when the people you love are happy and safe and near you. He ate well, laughed easily, and for a few hours he felt like a man who had everything he needed. And in that moment he truly did. It was past 11 o'clock when they finally said their goodbyes and walked to the car. The children were already half asleep, Bilal drowsy and slow, Hira nearly limp in Sanaa's arms. They settled into the back seat, and within minutes both of them were fully asleep, heads tilted toward each other, still dressed in their wedding clothes. Sanaa climbed into the passenger seat and fastened her seatbelt. Raza started the engine. The old car coughed once, then settled into its familiar rumble. He pulled out of the venue and onto the main road, heading toward the highway that would take them home. The highway at that hour was dark and mostly empty. A few trucks moved in the distance, their red tail lights blinking like slow warnings in the black night. The air outside had turned cold, and Raza kept the windows up. The heater in the car only worked halfway, warm on the driver's side, barely anything on the passenger side, but it was enough to keep the children comfortable. Sanaa rested her head lightly against the window and closed her eyes. Raza drove steadily, his hands easy on the wheel, his mind drifting between the wedding and the quiet comfort of the dark road ahead. They had been driving for about 30 minutes when the car began to feel different. It started subtly, a slight roughness in the engine that was more than the usual idle. Then the vibration in the steering wheel became stronger, more pronounced, harder to ignore. Raza felt it in his palms. He adjusted his grip and told himself it was just the road surface. But then the engine note changed, deeper, uneven, like something working harder than it should. He pressed the accelerator slightly, trying to smooth it out. It did not smooth out. If anything, it worsened. Sanaa opened her eyes. She felt it too. She sat up a little straighter and looked at Raza. "What is that sound?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but there was something behind it, a careful, measured concern that wives use when they do not want to alarm their sleeping children. Raza glanced at the dashboard. No warning lights. The engine temperature looked normal. He exhaled slowly. "The road is uneven here," he said. "We are almost home. Do not worry." Sanaa looked at him for a moment, then looked back at the road. She did not say anything more, but she did not close her eyes again either. The car shook harder, not violently, but with a kind of persistent, building instability that makes the body go tense before the mind fully understand why. Raza slowed down slightly. The shaking eased a little. He felt a wash of relief. Maybe it had been the speed. Maybe the road had been rough. He breathed again and kept his eyes on the white lines of the highway stretching ahead. The night was very dark out here, far from a city, far from any streetlights. The headlights of the old car barely reached far enough. Everything beyond their pale, yellowed glow was just blackness. And then it happened. There was no dramatic build-up, no final warning. It came the way real disasters come, suddenly, without permission, out of the ordinary flow of an ordinary night. A truck appeared in their lane, not slowing down, not swerving, just there, its headlights enormous and blinding, its horns screaming through the silence of the highway. Raza's body reacted before his mind did. His foot slammed the brake pedal to the floor. His hands wrenched the steering wheel to the left. Hard and desperate and immediate. But the car did not respond the way it should have. The brakes, those worn, grinding, ignored brakes, did not grab the road cleanly. The tires screeched and the car began to slide rather than stop, moving sideways across the wet surface of the highway with terrifying speed. Raza yanked the wheel again, fighting it, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched, his whole body rigid with the effort of trying to control something that was no longer listening to him. The truck swerved at the last second. It missed them by a distance that would later seem impossible to believe. But the car, already out of control, could not be saved. It left the road. The right side dropped off the edge of the tarmac and caught the loose gravel of the shoulder, and the car spun, one violent lurching rotation, before crashing through a low metal barrier and coming to rest at a steep angle on the slope beyond it. The impact was not a single sound. It was a sequence of sounds, the shriek of metal, the explosion of glass, the grinding scream of the car's body against the barrier, and underneath all of it, from the back seat, two voices. Bilal first, sharp and terrified, and then Hira, a high, broken cry that pierced through everything. And then silence. That silence lasted only a few seconds. But to Raza, sitting in the driver's seat with the airbag pressed against his face and a ringing so loud in his ears that it drowned out everything else, those seconds felt like falling through something with no bottom. He could not move at first. His body had been thrown forward and then back, and he felt pain in his chest, in his neck, in both his arms. He tried to speak. He could not find his voice. He turned his head, slowly, because turning it quickly sent white fire down his spine, and looked at the passenger seat. Sanaa was against the door. Her window had shattered, and her head was resting at an angle that made his heart seize. Her eyes were closed. There was blood on her temple. Not a lot, but enough. "Sanaa," he said. His voice came out cracked and thin. She did not move. He tried to reach for her, but his arm would not cooperate fully. "Sanaa." Nothing. He turned to look at the back seat. Bilal was awake, pressed into the corner, shaking so hard that his teeth were chattering, his eyes wild and glassy with shock. Hira was slumped against him, making a small, continuous sound. Not a cry, just a soft moan. Her left arm bent in a way that arms are not supposed to bend. Outside, the world had already begun to respond. Two cars had stopped on the highway above. People were climbing down the embankment, phones in hand, shouting to each other, shouting toward the car. Someone called out asking if anyone was alive. Raza tried to answer. He managed something, a sound, a word. And he heard voices responding, growing closer, more urgent. A man appeared at the driver's side window, his face pale and alarmed, his hands reaching in to check if the window could be opened. Another person was already calling the emergency services. The cold night air rushed in through the broken glass, and somewhere in the distance, a child was still making that small broken sound. The ambulance took 22 minutes to arrive. Raza would later be told this fact by one of the paramedics, in the kind of careful, matter-of-fact tone that people use when they want to deliver information without adding to the weight of a situation that is already too heavy. 22 minutes. Raza spent every one of those minutes unable to reach his wife, unable to properly hold his children, unable to do the one thing that fathers are supposed to do in moments of crisis: fix it. He sat in that crushed, tilted car, holding Bilal's hand through the gap between the seats, listening to Hira's soft sounds, watching Sanaa's chest to make sure it was still rising and falling, and feeling a kind of helplessness that he had never known before in his entire life. Sanaa had a fractured collarbone, 3 broken ribs, and a concussion serious enough to keep her hospitalized for 8 days. The doctors told Raza that she had been lucky, that the injuries, while painful and serious, were not life-threatening. Raza nodded when they said this. He thanked them quietly and held her hand when she finally opened her eyes in the hospital room, her face pale and confused and full of pain. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she asked about the children. He told her they were safe. What he did not say, what he could not yet bring himself to say out loud, was that Hira's arm had been broken in 2 places, or that Bilal had not spoken a full sentence since the crash. Hira's arm required surgery. She was too young to fully understand what had happened, but she was old enough to be frightened of the hospital, of the needles, of the machines that beeped through the night. She cried for her mother constantly in those first days, and when Sanaa was finally brought in a wheelchair to sit beside her daughter's bed, they held each other in the particular way of mothers and daughters who have been separated in a frightening moment, tightly, without words, for a very long time. Raza stood in the doorway of that hospital room and watched his family, and he felt something inside him break open in a way that had nothing to do with physical injury. Bilal did not speak much for weeks after the crash. The doctors called it acute stress reaction. He would sit quietly, eat when told to eat, sleep when told to sleep, but the boy who had asked 100 questions a day had gone somewhere deep and quiet inside himself. He started waking up in the night screaming, not every night, but often enough that it became a pattern. He would wake up in the dark, disoriented and terrified, calling out in a voice that was too small and too desperate for a 7-year-old boy. And Raza would come to him and hold him and say that everything was fine, that everyone was safe. But holding his son in the dark at 3 in the morning, Raza could not quite convince himself of those words either. The car was a total loss. The insurance covered a portion of it, not enough. The hospital bills began to arrive in envelopes that Raza opened alone at the kitchen table, after the children were in bed. He looked at the numbers without expression. He had some savings. Not much. His brother Cameron helped. His co-workers organized a small collection among themselves, the kind of quiet, dignified gesture that good people make when they do not know what else to do. Raza accepted it with gratitude and with a shame he could not fully explain. The shame of a man who had been warned, who had been told, and who had chosen not to listen. Because that was the thing that lived with him now, not just the grief, not just the guilt, not just the fear that had moved into the back of his chest and refused to leave. It was the knowledge that this had been preventable, that every person who had looked at that car and said something was wrong had been right, that the sound of the brakes, the oil on the driveway, the trembling in the steering wheel, none of it had been imaginary. None of it had been dramatic. It had all been real, and it had all been telling him the same thing, over and over, in the only language machines know how to speak. And he had not listened. He had smiled and said it would be fine. He had trusted something that had long since stopped deserving that trust. There is a particular kind of regret that does not announce itself loudly. It does not come with anger or bitterness or the desire to blame someone else. It comes quietly, in the ordinary moments, when you watch your daughter trying to brush her hair with one good arm, when you hear your son cry out in the night, when you help your wife lower herself carefully onto the couch because her ribs still hurt when she moves too quickly. It comes when you realize that the people who depend on you are suffering not because of something that happened to you, but because of a choice you made. That is a weight that does not lift quickly. That is something a man carries for a long time. Raza sat beside Sanaa's hospital bed on the 4th night, long after visiting hours had ended and the ward had grown quiet. She was sleeping, her breathing slow, and even her face relaxed in a way that it rarely was during the day when the pain kept pulling at it. He looked at her for a very long time. He thought about every morning she had packed his lunch without being asked. Every evening she had waited with dinner, no matter how late he came home. Every time she had trusted his judgment, deferred to his confidence, believed him when he said things would be fine. She had never once doubted him, and he had let that trust become something he leaned on without earning it. He thought about Cameron, about Uncle Farouk, about every single moment when someone had handed him the truth and he had folded it up and put it away and told himself he would deal with it later. He understood now, in a way that no amount of advice could have made him understand before, that later is not a guaranteed thing. That roads do not wait for you to be ready. That machines do not care about your confidence or your history or the fact that something has worked before. They simply stop working. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. On a dark highway at 70 kilometers per hour, with your sleeping children in the backseat. When Sanaa came home from the hospital, the house felt different, quieter, more careful, full of a tenderness that had always been there, but now had an edge of sorrow underneath it. Raza did everything. He cooked, he cleaned, he helped Tira with her exercises, he sat with Bilal in the evenings and read to him the way he used to when Bilal was very small. Slowly, over weeks and then months, things began to heal. Hira's arm grew strong again. Bilal began to speak more, began to ask questions again, began to come back to himself in the gradual, quiet way that children do when they feel safe. Sanaa's ribs stopped hurting. Her smile came back, first briefly, then more often, then with its old warmth. But Raza changed in ways that did not fully reverse. He became the kind of man who checks things, who notices sounds, who does not wave away a warning or smile away a concern. He became the kind of man who pulls over when something feels wrong, even when he is almost home, even when it seems like a small thing, even when every instinct tells him that it will probably be fine. Because he had learned, at a price no man should have to pay, that probably fine is not good enough when the lives of the people you love are the thing at stake. He sold what remained of the old car for scrap. He stood and watched the tow truck take it away, and he felt nothing like nostalgia. He felt only a kind of cold, clear sorrow for what the car had represented, for what he had refused to see, for the version of himself that had stood in that driveway telling Cameron everything would be fine. He bought another car eventually, older than he would have liked because money was still tight, but the first thing he did was take it to Cameron's garage. He sat in the waiting area for 2 full hours while Cameron went through every system, every component, every possible point of failure. When Cameron came out with his list, Raza did not argue about a single item on it. He paid for everything. He drove home in a car that had been checked, repaired, and made as safe as it could be. And even then he drove slowly. There's something that Raza says now. When the subject comes up, when a neighbor mentions a strange sound in their car or a friend talks about putting off a repair because the timing is not right, he does not say it loudly or with drama. He says it the way a man says something he has paid dearly to learn, quietly, looking directly at the person, making sure they understand that he means every word. He says, a car is not just a machine. It is the thing that carries your family. The people inside it trust you to make sure it is safe. They trust you the way children trust their fathers, completely, without question, without knowing that trust can be misplaced. Do not make them pay for your confidence. Do not let a warning go ignored because the timing is inconvenient or the cost feels like too much. There is no cost greater than what you will carry if something goes wrong. There is nothing more expensive than regret. He is right. And the tragedy is that most of us will nod when we hear this, agree that it makes sense, feel it for a moment in the way that important things make you feel them, deeply, and then distantly, as the ordinary business of the day pulls you back. Most of us will not change until something forces us to. Raza knows this. He was one of us, after all. He heard the warnings. He understood the logic. And he still chose to believe that his story would be different. That his car would hold on just a little longer. That this time, like every time before, it would be fine. It was not fine. And the road does not make exceptions, not for good men, not for loving fathers, not for people who simply did not want to believe that the thing they trusted had already started to let them go. So check your car. Fix what is broken. Listen to the people who love you enough to warn you. And never, not even for a single night on a dark and quiet highway, trust something with the lives of your family that has not earned that trust. Because the price of getting it wrong is not something you pay once. It is something you pay every day, in the eyes of your children, in the silence of a house that was almost made empty, in the weight of a lesson that should never have had to be learned this way.